Welcome to Chapter 10 of the Prodbach, the Conceive phase. What if we told you that the thrilling adventure of bringing a product to life doesn't actually kick off with blueprints and building, but something a whole lot less concrete?
That's exactly where we're diving today. This deep dive is all about the conceive phase, the absolute starting line of the product management lifecycle. And for good reason, it's often called the fuzzy front end.
The fuzzy front end. I love that description because it's so true, isn't it? Unlike later, more linear phases like develop or qualify, where you have clear objectives, deliverables, the conceive phase is intentionally messy.
Yeah, it really is. It's research heavy, involves exploring all sorts of ideas, maybe changing direction.
Pivoting, yeah.
And sometimes you might feel like you're just, thinking, with no obvious, measurable progress happening for a while.
Right, you can feel a bit uncertain.
Exactly. But despite the fuzziness, this phase is absolutely foundational. It's where the seeds of potential products are planted. And it kind of breaks down into two core activities. Concept identification. That's finding those initial market opportunities. And then concept investigation, really digging into a specific concept to see if it, has legs.
And for you listening, getting a handle on this crucial, albeit maybe chaotic, beginning is key. It helps you understand the immense amount of groundwork that happens before anyone picks up a tool or writes a single line of code. It's really where the big picture starts taking shape. So in this fuzzy front end, what's the product manager's main gig then? It sounds less about managing tasks and timelines like later on.
You got it. The role shifts significantly here. It's much less about execution and delivery and much more about exploration, research, and honestly, relentless questioning. The phase is framed by these high-level concepts that push you to look broadly before you can zoom in.
Okay, let's zoom out first then. Concept identification. This is the mission, right? To find new market opportunities by really understanding the landscape, both outside and inside your company.
Precisely. And the goal is to land on a promising product concept to explore further. This is classic territory for tools like SWOT analysis, understanding your strengths, weaknesses internally,
Right.
and the opportunities and threats externally.
Okay, starting with that external assessment, you're basically scouting the horizon.
Okay.
What forces are shaping the market? What opportunities or threats are brewing out there?
And it's not static, that's key. The pace of change varies wildly, from stable, slow-moving industries to the breakneck speed of high tech where the market can just flip in months.
Yeah, totally different worlds.
And you need to look across several fronts. The overall market itself, how's it growing, who's in it, demographics, then competitors, who's new, what are existing players up to, technology, what's emerging, what's becoming obsolete, partners, channels, suppliers, that sort of thing, and the broader environment regulations, economic shifts, political factors.
What seems critical here, and something the source really emphasizes, is identifying the high-impact trends. Not just what's happening today, but looking further down the road.
Exactly. Sometimes the biggest impacts come from completely outside your immediate industry. Think about how the internet just fundamentally disrupted retail, publishing, communication. You got to spot those analogous impacts.
That makes sense. And beyond those broad trends, getting deep into customer needs is, non-negotiable, right? This is voice of the customer, or VOC.
Absolutely. And it's not just asking customers what features they want. It's digging deeper to understand their underlying goals, their frustrations, the unmet needs or gaps in current solutions.
Right. The real pain points.
Yeah. This isn't just for tuning existing products. It's often the seedbed for, radical innovation.
So how do you actually do VOC? Is it just sending out surveys?
Well, it's a mix. Surveys and direct interviews are common, sure, but some of the best insights actually come from simply observing customers, studying how they perform a task now.
Like watching them work.
Exactly. Maybe mapping out their process flow step by step. That can reveal unexpected bottlenecks or headaches that are just ripe for a new solution.
The source gives that great example with Apple's iTunes. When the iPod first launched, people often didn't have big digital music libraries. Converting CDs was a real chore, a headache.
Right.
iTunes wasn't just a music player. It solved that specific headache of acquiring and managing digital music easily. And that solution just fueled the explosion of the iPod's success. That's uncovering a critical underlying need.
Precisely. And VOC isn't a one-off task. It needs to be ongoing. And it needs input from sales, support, marketing, engineering, really anyone who touches the customer. It also helps you see market limitations and potential threats from how customer behavior is changing.
I bet the sheer volume of information you gather is a challenge in itself, though.
Oh, definitely. Managing it all is key.
Which leads to some key questions you're asking during this external dive, right? Like, okay, what specific trends translate into actual opportunities or threats for us? How big are they?
Yeah.
What emerging needs is VOC revealing? Which patterns are most important, most impactful?
Yes. And translating those trends into specific opportunities and threats for your company is the logical next step. A positive impact becomes an opportunity, a negative one, a threat.
What's fascinating here is how one major trend can cut both ways. The source points to the baby boomer generation aging. Huge opportunity for healthcare, travel, fitness.
Absolutely.
But a clear threat to industries reliant on demand for maybe sports equipment, large family homes, certain types of cars, as that demographic ages out of those needs.
Exactly. And the point here isn't to brainstorm solutions yet. It's really just to acknowledge and understand these specific opportunities and threats in detail. Who they affect, how big the impact is, the time frame involved.
So you're asking, what concrete opportunities or threats come from this external view? What specific market problems are surfacing? How significant is each one? And crucially, what's the potential cost if we just ignore them?
Right. After that external view, you pivot inward for the internal assessment. Okay, what are our company's strengths we can lean on? And what are the weaknesses that might hold us back or, need fixing?
This involves looking at various internal angles: competitiveness, market share, brand perception, products capabilities, cost structure, competencies, IP, company culture, knowledge base.
Resources to people, capital, assets, and partner capabilities. Some of these obviously apply at higher company levels, but they influence product possibilities.
Where does this data come from? Internal audits? External stats?
It's a mix, yeah. Internal reviews, maybe benchmarking against competitors using external stats. And sometimes just by doing this internal check, you uncover more opportunities or threats. Maybe a strength you didn't realize gives you an edge, or a weakness that makes your competitor's gap an opportunity for you.
Interesting side effect. So the key questions here are pretty straightforward. What strengths can we really leverage effectively? What weaknesses do we absolutely need to address or at least work around?
Okay, so we've mapped the landscape with the situation analysis. We know the external forces and our internal situation. Now, how do we turn those opportunities and threats into actual action ideas? That's where you develop product strategy options.
Right. These are the specific initiatives or project ideas that could capitalize on those opportunities or maybe counter the threats.
Yeah.
And they have to play to your strengths and be realistic about your weaknesses.
Yeah, exactly. Think back to that baby boomer exercise equipment example. Options could be tweak existing equipment, maybe create a whole new senior-focused product line, or even license and rebrand someone else's equipment just to test the waters.
And these options aren't limited to just the product itself, are they?
Not at all. They can involve changes to the whole marketing mix, pricing, promotion, distribution, or even non-marketing stuff like support, ordering processes, finding new partners. It's really a full business approach.
This part sounds like it's often an intense team effort, maybe a formal ideation session.
It often is, yeah. You're constantly asking, how well can we leverage our strengths for this idea? And weaknesses are critical here. Some just limit scope, maybe make something harder. But others, especially when you're facing disruptive innovation, well, they can make it impossible for an incumbent to respond.
How so?
Because their existing business model, or maybe their technology architecture, is fundamentally incompatible with the disruption. If a competitor launches something disruptive that your platform simply cannot support without a complete rebuild, well, that's a weakness that might eliminate a strategic option entirely.
Wow. Okay. So questions to ask. What initiatives really leverage our strengths for these opportunities or threats? What initiatives minimize the impact of our weaknesses?
Right. And after brainstorming, you have to prioritize. Which options offer the highest potential for success? Play to strength, target big opportunities, which are critical defensive moves against major threats. Urgency is definitely a factor too.
This whole process seems to funnel down towards the next big step: create the product concept. This sounds like the pivotal transition, moving from those high-level strategic ideas, the macro view, to focusing on a single potential project idea, the microscope view.
That's a great analogy. It's like building that retirement portfolio. First, you decide on your asset allocation, stocks versus bonds. based on your overall strategy. That's like prioritizing your strategy options. Now you have to pick the specific stocks, bonds, or funds you're actually going to invest in. That's defining the product concept.
Got it. So the product concept is that focused idea, a specific market need, and a conceptual solution designed to address it. And it's usually captured in a lightweight document.
Yeah, initially. Answering core questions like, what exact problem are we solving? Who specifically has this problem? How big is the market opportunity, really? What's the timing or market window look like? Who are the main competitors we need to worry about? What are the core features or differentiators that make this concept stand out? How would we potentially sell or deliver it? And crucially, how would we measure if it's actually a business success down the line?
Okay, so this pulls info from the earlier analysis but structures it for one specific idea. Visuals like mock-ups probably help here too.
Definitely. And the source reminds us, concepts can bubble up ad hoc sometimes, maybe from a random customer conversation. But even then, they still need this kind of assessment rigor applied.
And a concept isn't just for a brand new product, right?
No, absolutely not. It can be for a truly new product, sure, but also a significant upgrade to an existing one, maybe a single feature release, or even non-functional things like improving quality, reducing cost, or enhancing the user experience. Those can be powerful differentiators too.
All this work leads up to product concept approval. It was the initial screening, the first major gate in the process. Ideas are still just hypotheses at this point.
Exactly. The product management lifecycle typically has these formal management decision points, these gates between phases. And the gate between conceive and plan is the first big one where an idea can actually be stopped.
So you don't just let everything through.
Ideally, no. You want a funnel shape. Lots of ideas enter conceive. Only the most promising ones exit to plan, and fewer still actually make it all the way to launch. Many companies, unfortunately, kind of have a pipe from plan onwards. Meaning once an idea gets approved for plan, it gets a sort of free pass, which can lead to a lot of wasted effort on products that were probably doomed from the start.
Ouch. So the goal of this gate is ruthless pruning. Screen out weaker ideas, focus limited resources on the strongest prospects, reduce risk early.
Precisely. And at this early stage, the analysis is often more subjective because you're working with high-level information. You don't have all the details yet.
How do you make that call then?
A common way is using something like a prioritization matrix. You score the concepts against predefined criteria, maybe market attractiveness, competitive landscape, timing, potential value, differentiation, strategic fit with the company.
Makes sense.
And the decision to move from this identification stage to the more detailed investigation can be a formal gate review committee meeting, or maybe just an informal go-no-go decision by a key leader, depending on the company culture and project scale.
Okay, so we've survived the first filter. We have one or maybe two promising product concepts identified and approved for further exploration. Now we enter the second subphase, concept investigation.
Right. This is where you really flesh out that chosen concept and test its viability from all angles: market viability, technical feasibility, and business viability. The mindset here is absolutely crucial.
Which is?
Treat the concept as a hypothesis you were actively trying to disprove. Finding failure points now, when you've invested relatively little, is actually the best possible outcome sometimes.
Much, much better than finding them after you've spent millions launching it. And the process here isn't strictly linear, is it? It's more iterative.
Exactly. It can kind of spiral. You might learn something during the technical feasibility study that sends you right back to refine the market requirements, for example. It's a learning process.
So what's involved? You mentioned establishing a team, charter, deep dives into market and solution.
Yeah, getting feedback, refining the strategy, and ultimately building a solid business case.
Okay, before we jump into those specifics, it might be worth quickly noting some common terminology for documentation that comes up here. The source mentions market requirements documents, MRD, and product requirements documents, PRD.
Good point. Yeah, the MRD typically focuses on the problem or the gap from the market's perspective. It's about what is needed. It defines the market's needs, their pains, the outcomes they're looking for.
And the PRD then focuses on the solution, how the need will actually be satisfied. It translates those market needs into specific product functionality and behavior.
Right, and different companies use different names. You might hear business requirements document or functional spec, but the core idea of separating the what, the problem, from the how, the solution, is really valuable.
Got it. So the first step in fleshing out the concept is getting the right people involved. Establish a cross-functional product concept team. Why cross-functional?
Well, because investigating a concept touches pretty much every part of the business, right? You need insights on what customers need, that's marketing, product, how to build it, that's engineering, design. Can we support it? That's ops, support. How do we sell it? Sales. It takes a village.
And the product manager is the natural leader here, acting as the voice of the customer, holding the vision.
Exactly. They're uniquely positioned to optimize the outcome across the entire life cycle. And the source points out that PMs staying with a product from concept all the way to retirement is often a best practice, helps ensure that initial vision doesn't get lost or diluted over time.
Makes sense. But leading this team requires buy-in and resources from senior leadership, I imagine.
Oh, absolutely. The PM's job is to clearly articulate the team's purpose and goals, to rally everyone and secure that support.
And ideally, you formalize that purpose with a project charter.
Yeah, it's a really useful guiding document. It defines the team's mission, maybe how they'll operate, what they're expected to deliver by the end of this investigation phase.
What kind of things does it answer?
Key questions like, who's actually on the team? What's our specific purpose here? How do we define success for this investigation? Who's our sponsor? What are the rough deadlines, needed resources, meeting frequency? Approval can vary. Sometimes it's informal. Sometimes it needs a formal sign-off.
Okay, teams formed, charters in place.
Right.
Now we move into market investigation, but this is the detailed version, right? Going deeper than before.
Exactly. Deeper into understanding the target segment's needs and the specific gap we think our concept addresses. The effort here really depends on how well-defined the concept's origin was.
Meaning?
Well, if the initial concept came from a really deep VOC dive already, maybe you focus more now on refining the specifics and really nailing the competitor comparison. If it was more of a strategic mandate from above, you might need to do extensive new research now. The main output here is detailed market requirements.
So the key questions are getting more granular. Precisely who is the target market attributes? Size, growth potential. Who are the specific buyers versus the actual end users? What are their goals in this area?
Right. What are the as-is scenarios showing their current pain points? What are the desired-to-be scenarios if their problem was solved? What's the complete list of needs required to close that gap and be truly competitive? And, critically, how important is each of those needs relative to the others?
And you're still leveraging VOC, using internal proxies like sales and support.
Absolutely. Or maybe bringing in external help. And crucially, tapping into the cross-functional team's different perspectives is vital. An engineer might spot a requirement that's technically trivial but creates huge user value. Or maybe the opposite, something that sounds simple but is technically incredibly complex.
Part of this detailed market investigation is really understanding the target market deeply, going beyond just demographics.
Yeah, you absolutely need to know the difference between the buyer, the person who pays, often motivated by cost value, the target for your value prop and sales process, and the user, the person who actually uses the product day to day, motivated by task completion, the target for functionality and UX design.
They can be the same person sometimes, but often not.
Often not, especially in B2B. And sizing the market gets more refined here too. You start with the total available market, or TAM, that's everyone who could potentially buy this type of product.
Okay.
Then you narrow that down to the serviceable available market, or SAM, the portion of the TAM you can actually reach with your current or planned channels and product capabilities. Factors like market penetration rates, growth trends, and your distribution channels all influence that SAM.
To make the target market feel real, especially if there are different types of buyers or users, you often create personas.
Exactly. Personas are these fictional yet data-driven representations of your key customer groups. They usually have names, maybe photos, demographics, psychographics, behavioral details. They become a kind of common reference point for the entire team.
How so?
Well, instead of abstract arguments, the team can ask, would Persona Emily actually use this feature? Or, how does this help Persona David achieve his goal? It really helps anchor decision-making and user needs.
And you can have buyer personas focused on the purchasing decision and the sales process, and user personas focused more on how people interact with the product itself, influencing functionality and UX.
Precisely. And a really powerful way to capture the market problem itself is by illustrating the market problem, often through creating problem scenarios.
What are those exactly?
They describe a typical situation from a specific persona's viewpoint. Their setting, their goal, the steps they take now to try and achieve it, the decisions they make, and importantly, the pain points or bottlenecks they encounter along the way.
Ah, okay. These scenarios, which belong in the market requirements document, the MRD, help the team really empathize and see the challenge clearly.
Yeah, and the opportunity often lies in simplifying those existing painful steps.
What's fascinating here is thinking about latent needs.
Oh yeah, that's a critical. These are needs users have but maybe don't articulate, often because they just don't know a better way exists. They've accepted the current workaround.
So how do you uncover those?
Observing users, maybe through ethnographic studies or analyzing those problem scenarios, can reveal these hidden needs. The best companies really try to uncover both the articulated needs and these latent ones. Scenarios help the team envision truly innovative solutions that users couldn't have asked for directly.
Just a quick note. Problem scenarios showing the asses go in the MRD. Later, things like solution scenarios, use cases, or user stories, which show how the new solution works, typically go in the product requirements document, the PRD.
Good distinction. And alongside understanding the user, we also need to do a deeper dive on analyzing the competition. It's not just who they are, but why the market problem persists despite their offerings. What are their solutions missing? Why are they inadequate from the user's perspective?
Right. You need to compare product-to-product capabilities, identify the major direct competitors, obviously, but also don't forget homegrown solutions customers might cobble together themselves.
Absolutely. Sometimes those DIY solutions are your strongest competition in early markets because they show the real underlying need and the lengths people will go to work around the lack of a good commercial option.
How do you get this competitive intel? Use their products if you can.
Definitely. Use their products, look at their websites, marketing literature, read third-party reviews, talk to their customers if possible, scour online forums, maybe even use secret shoppers, and look beyond just the core features.
How so?
Look at the full end-to-end experience, purchasing, onboarding, support, documentation, everything. That whole journey matters.
Building a competitive matrix is useful, comparing features side by side.
Yes, but here's a really critical nugget from the source. More features does not equal a better product. Don't fall into the trap of just trying to copy your competitor's entire feature list.
Focus on being superior on the key attributes that truly matter to your target segment.
Exactly. Features must earn their way onto your requirements list based on genuine market value, not just achieving competitive parity for parity's sake.
And assess how well they've implemented those features too, right? Is their version of feature X clunky or seamless, buggy or robust?
Right. That reveals opportunities to truly differentiate where it counts most. This whole competitive analysis really drives where you prioritize your own development effort and resources.
Okay, so the outcome of all this detailed market investigation is documenting the market requirements. This is the core output of this part of the phase, capturing the market needs, the desired capabilities, any constraints, required quality levels. The level of detail will vary by product type, of course.
And we distinguish functional requirements, what the product needs to do, like allowing a user to save a document, from non-functional requirements, how well it needs to do it. Things like usability, performance, security, scalability, compliance.
The MRD, again, is primarily about the problem, what is needed. While it might hint at potential solutions, the main focus is defining the need clearly.
And here's another crucial point. Requirements must be measurable. Avoid vague subjective terms like user-friendly or high performance or fast.
What should you do instead?
You need to define quantitative success criteria with a clear pass-fail test. For example, instead of fast, say, system shall complete transaction X in under 2 seconds 95% of the time. Instead of user-friendly, maybe a first-time user shall be able to complete core task Y with fewer than 3 errors without consulting documentation. Measurable.
Yeah.
Testable.
Makes sense. And prioritization is absolutely key here, too. Not everything can be equally important.
No way. You need to clearly indicate the relative importance of each requirement from the market's perspective, maybe high, medium, low, or must-have, important, optional, or using some kind of weighted scoring matrix. Identifying the handful of absolute must-have requirements that deliver the core value is essential. Everything else is potentially negotiable or could be pushed to a later phase.
And this is where the concept of a minimum viable product, MVP, shows up in the Conceive phase.
Yeah, exactly. But here, in Conceive, the MVP isn't necessarily a launchable product yet. It's more about defining the minimum set of functionality or experience needed to test whether you've correctly identified the market problem and whether your proposed core benefit resonates with potential users.
So it might just be a mock-up or a simple prototype testing one key scenario.
Precisely. It's about learning with the lowest possible investment at this early stage. The source also mentions MVP in the delivery phase, which is more like a basic version launched to early adopters for rapid feedback, but the Conceive phase MVP is purely for validation testing.
Got it. So to sum up, the required MRD content should summarize the target segment, detail the problem, list the requirements with measurable success criteria, prioritize them based on market importance, and ideally consider the whole product view, including things like support and training needs.
Exactly. All right, so now we understand what is needed from the market's perspective, documented in the MRD. Now, solution investigation is all about figuring out how we could potentially meet those needs.
And this often involves the development team taking more of a lead role, right? Collaborating closely with the PM.
Yeah, typically. The core idea here is that there usually isn't one single right solution. There are often countless potential ways to solve the problem, and each one comes with trade-offs in cost, complexity, time to market, technical risk.
So the effort here is exploring those different options, estimating their feasibility, cost, and timeline. It starts with identifying solution candidates.
Right. Ideas might come from within the team based on the MRD, maybe from dedicated ideation or brainstorming workshops, or even joint application design JAD sessions.
Then customers help here too.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Especially lead users, those customers who are already adapting existing products or processes to solve the problem in novel ways, often way ahead of the general market curve. Getting their feedback on solution ideas is invaluable. Open innovation presenting the problem to a wider community and maybe rewarding the best ideas is another approach some companies use.
A really helpful tool here you mentioned is developing solution scenarios. If problem scenarios show the as-is pain,
then solution scenarios show the to-be delight. They illustrate how the user interacts with your specific proposed solution concept to achieve their goal more effectively. They're complementary to the problem scenarios and really help visualize the value you're creating.
like brainstorming different modifications for that baby boomer exercise equipment concept, adding extra padding, maybe voice control, simple gamification.
Exactly. And then creating scenarios showing how a senior user would actually interact with each of those options. You then try to rank these different solution candidates based on the value they create for the user. And value identification means tangible, ideally quantifiable benefits like save time, reduced errors, lower complexity, not just, cool-sounding features.
It's vital to stay objective here, right? Market-focused, avoiding internal bias towards pet ideas or technologies.
Absolutely critical. Once you have some promising solution candidates, you need to study feasibility and alternatives. Can we actually build this? What would it take? What are the risks involved?
This sounds like a formal feasibility study combined with an alternatives analysis.
Pretty much. It looks at technical viability. Can our tech do this? Financial viability, what's the rough cost? And operational viability, can we support this? It compares different design or architectural approaches and helps assess the risks associated with each early on.
And development and design teams usually drive this part, with PM input.
Typically, yes. The effort involves scales with how new or complex the proposed solution is. Company culture also plays a big role here, how much technical risk is acceptable.
Estimates at this stage are still pretty high level, right? Rough order of magnitude, or ROM.
Yeah, exactly. ROM estimates for development costs maybe in terms of team months or FTEs, and maybe initial thoughts on unit costs, the cost to produce each item if it's hardware. Timelines are also ROM, maybe ballparked in quarters or with wide ranges like 6-9 months.
It's important to explore maybe a couple of realistic alternatives and the ROM estimates so you understand the trade-offs involved.
Definitely. And you also need to identify significant risks. Is the core technology viable? Do we have the right skills or resources? What about operational impacts down the line? You do a basic risk assessment, likelihood times impact, to flag the really big red flag risks.
You don't have to solve every single risk now, but knowing them helps plan for the next phase.
Right. And for products that might be delivered in phases, this is also where you might start outlining a very preliminary capability roadmap.
Supporting all this solution work is experienced design research. Building innovative solutions, especially for those latent needs we talked about, requires deep customer understanding that goes beyond just asking questions.
Absolutely. Direct observation is key. Again, watching what users actually do, not just what they say they do. Seeing their unconscious actions or workarounds. Comparing competitor experiences in detail. Adapting solutions that work well in other unrelated markets. These can all spark ideas.
So this research refines requirements, helps with segmentation, maybe helps target early adopters.
All of the above. And specialists like information architects, usability specialists, maybe even business anthropologists might get involved here, using methods ranging from ethnography to focus groups to detailed usability testing.
A very common method to test feasibility and get early feedback during solution investigation is prototyping, right? Creating an early, limited version of the concept.
Yeah, prototypes are incredibly useful. They serve so many purposes. Getting the whole team aligned on a concrete vision, working through tricky design challenges, helping to sell the idea internally to stakeholders.
Confirming technical feasibility. Can we actually make this core piece work?
And, crucially, getting external validation by putting something tangible in front of potential users to get their reactions.
The source actually breaks down different types of prototypes.
It does. There's a whole spectrum. Proof of concept or breadboard just proves a specific technical idea works, often looks rough. Mock-up or low-fidelity prototype, basic visuals, maybe wireframes or simple screen flows, illustrates the concept crudely. Model. Focuses on the aesthetic look and feel, might not be functional. Virtual or high-fidelity prototype. Detailed digital representation like CAD models or exact screen designs looks real but isn't coded. Rapid prototype. Quick physical fabrication or visually accurate software model but not intended for production use. Working prototype. Actually functions, demonstrates key features, but maybe not fully polished or robust. Pre-production prototype. Fully functional, used for final testing, maybe beta programs.
Wow. Okay, so they exist on a spectrum of fidelity and purpose depending on what you need to learn or demonstrate at that point.
Exactly. Once you have a chosen solution direction emerging from this investigation, you need to document the initial product requirements, often in a PRD. This captures how the chosen solution will meet the needs defined back in the MRD.
It lays out the overall approach, the high-level functionality, and maybe critical non-functional requirements like essential usability or performance constraints. It doesn't need to be exhaustive at this stage, just enough to define the concept clearly.
That's the idea. PRDs can include those solution scenarios or maybe user stories. As a persona, I want to do X so that I get Y benefit, which really show how the user interacts with the proposed solution. Use cases, detailing actor interactions with the system, or more formal functional requirements, the system shell, also describe the intended behavior.
And diagrams, UI mockups, wireframes are essential complements to the text, I assume.
Oh, absolutely. Visuals are key. And just a quick note on agile teams. They often rely more on a high-level product vision document, plus a well-groomed, prioritized product backlog of user stories, instead of creating one big, formal PRD document up front.
How do user stories work?
The product owner typically writes them in that as a "I want that asked" format, and adds specific acceptance criteria, the testable conditions that must be met for the story to be considered done. Non-functional requirements are still captured, maybe as specific constraints or separate backlog items, but often at a high level initially, focusing on those with significant cost or risk implications.
And it's important to maintain the distinction between high-level requirements, what goes in the PRD or backlog, and detailed design specifications, which come later in the develop phase.
Crucial distinction. Responsibility for the PRD is typically a collaboration. Development often takes the lead on the technical how, while the product manager focuses on ensuring it correctly and effectively addresses the market needs identified in the MRD. Other specialists contribute as needed.
Okay, now, parallel to all this internal investigation, market, solution, feasibility is the absolutely critical step. Obtain market feedback.
Cannot stress this enough. You must get the concept and the proposed solution, maybe via those mock-ups or prototypes, in front of potential users early and often. The concept is just a hypothesis until the market validates it. Delaying this is incredibly risky.
So you use prototypes not just to show off, but as props for realistic conversations with users.
Exactly. Does this concept actually resonate with them? Does the proposed solution, even in rough form, seem like it would actually close the gap you identified and make their life better?
What kind of outcomes can you expect?
Well, ideally, users get excited. Or maybe they offer partial feedback, identify limitations you hadn't thought of, or generally confirm you're on the right directional path. Or they give you negative feedback.
Which feels bad, but is actually valuable.
Incredibly valuable now. If multiple users tell you, this doesn't really solve my problem, or this actually creates new problems, or this isn't any better than my current workaround, or even you've targeted the wrong type of user for this idea, that is pure gold at this stage.
Why gold?
Because it tells you the concept has fundamental issues, or maybe the market need you thought was huge just isn't as significant as you estimated. Knowing this now, when you've invested relatively little time and money, is infinitely better than finding out after a costly failed launch.
So you have the option to refine the concept, maybe pivot to an alternative solution based on the feedback, or even make the tough call to just kill the project right there.
Exactly. This requires real objectivity, putting egos and internal politics aside. Market results are ultimately what matters. Get feedback early, get it often.
Finally, during this investigation phase, it's also important not to forget to assess operational impacts at a high level. It's easy to get laser-focused on the cool product features and forget the rest of the business.
Yeah, how will actually building, distributing, selling, and supporting this product impact other departments across the company?
So you need to ask, what major changes might be needed in manufacturing, logistics, sales processes, customer support systems? What are the rough estimated costs and resources required for those changes? What are the operational risks? Mitigation.
This requires input from leaders across the company: operations, finance, sales, support. Significant operational changes can sometimes turn into bigger projects than the product development effort itself, and they can heavily impact the overall business case. Can't ignore them.
Okay, so we've navigated all the research. We've hopefully tested the hypothesis of our concept's viability with real users,
Yeah.
assuming it still looks promising after all that scrutiny. The next step is solidifying strategy and building the formal business case.
Right. This is needed to justify the significant investment required in the next phases, like plan and develop. It's where you synthesize all that information you gathered during investigation and develop the product and marketing strategy. The documentation can range from simple summaries to more formal strategy documents.
This includes setting the overall product vision and strategy, right?
Yes. The vision is that enduring, high-level idea, what the product is fundamentally about, who it's for, and the core benefits it delivers. It should keep the team focused beyond just a list of features.
And the strategy.
The strategy is how you plan to achieve that vision. It provides the high-level context, maybe outlines a phased timeline if applicable. It should also consider the whole product concept, thinking about the ecosystem, partners, and services needed to deliver the complete value proposition to the customer, not just the core product itself.
So the vision inspires, the strategy provides the actionable roadmap linking back to company goals.
Precisely. You also need to set the preliminary value proposition and positioning. The value prop is essentially the promise you're making to the customer, the bundle of measurable and maybe subjective benefits they receive compared to the cost or alternatives.
And positioning is how you establish why your offering is uniquely better than the competition, specifically from the customer's perspective.
Exactly. You need reference points, either the customer's existing situation or specific competitors. The source really stresses focusing on the unique value embedded in the product offering itself, not just relying on external advantages like brand recognition. Combining these into a concise elevator pitch is a really useful exercise.
And defining this value prop in positioning early is core to success, right? It drives priorities, messaging. It's not just a marketing task tacked on at the end.
Absolutely fundamental. Should be defined early, not after the product's already built. Next, you set product and marketing objectives. These are your key performance indicators, or KPIs, how you'll actually measure success against your strategy.
And these should be smart.
Ideally, yes. Specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound. You might have high-level objectives looking out 2-3 years, maybe broken down into more concrete 6-12-month targets. These align stakeholders and clarify focus across different dimensions: product performance, project execution metrics, sales marketing goals, market adoption rates.
You also need to create a preliminary line strategy at this point.
Yeah, just an initial look at how the product will actually hit the market. High-level thoughts on the initial target segment, maybe potential configurations or pricing tiers, primary sales channels, rough forecast assumptions, key messaging points, your unique selling proposition or USP, initial thoughts on training needs, maybe rough budget estimates. It's preliminary, it gets refined later, but starts the planning.
And you also need to formally identify product and market risks.
Yep. Every product has risks, but you need to focus on the really consequential ones now. Think about risks in creating the product: technical hurdles, resource constraints, timeline slips, operational challenges, supplier issues, maybe IP concerns, and also market risks, timing issues, unexpected competitor responses, slow customer adoption, economic downturns.
Assess their likelihood and impact, identify the big red flag risks.
And start thinking about mitigation strategies, or maybe even a plan B for the really critical ones. While not every major risk needs to be fully resolved before you exit the conceive phase, identifying them up front is critical for realistic planning in the next phase. Better to know now.
Makes sense. Beyond the product strategy itself, you also often create the overall project charter for the delivery effort.
Right. This summarizes the project plan at a high level. It might be separate or part of the business case. It pulls together key project info like the objectives, key stakeholders, core team members, major deliverables, things that are explicitly out of scope, key milestones, known constraints, a summary of the risk plan, the communication approach. It's really the precursor to the detailed project plan that gets built out in the plan phase.
And tying absolutely everything together is the preliminary business case. This is the formal internal justification for moving forward, the overall cost-benefit analysis for the company.
Exactly. It can range from a relatively simple spreadsheet to a much more formal document set, depending on the company and the scale of the project. It essentially rolls up the strategy, the estimated financials, revenue projections, development costs, ongoing costs, and the operational assessment impacts we discuss.
And estimates are still high-level, Ram, at this stage.
Generally, yes. The goal is a quick but reasonably informed assessment of the concept's business potential. And importantly, strategic alignment or other qualitative factors can, and often should, override purely financial projections sometimes. It shouldn't be just a numbers exercise.
What key questions does the business case typically answer?
Things like, what's the core situation and opportunity? What specific needs does this address? What's the proposed solution and why is it compelling? What are the strategic objectives and key assumptions? What are the high-level costs and resource needs? How does it fit the company's overall strategy? What does the rough timeline look like? What's the estimated cost benefit or ROI? Critically, what happens if we don't do this? What are the major risks we identified? And what specific investment is required now and likely going forward?
Doing this level of due diligence up front, even at a high level, seems like it prevents wasting significant resources later on projects that just don't make business sense.
That's the entire point. The effort put into the business case should be proportional to the project's scope and the level of rigor in your downstream processes, but it serves as that critical decision point. Based on everything we know now, is this prospect worth investing more resources into?
Which brings us right to the moment of truth. Exiting the conceive phase. This requires formal approval of that business case and the overall strategy, usually by a designated sponsor or maybe a portfolio review committee.
Correct. And there are typically 4 possible outcomes at this major gate review. 1, pass. The project gets the green light and moves forward into the plan phase. 2, kill. The project is stopped, deemed not viable or attractive enough to pursue further. 3, put on hold. It's parked, maybe due to resource constraints or market timing, for potential reconsideration later. 4, recycle. It's sent back to the conceive phase for more investigation or refinement based on feedback from the review.
Navigating this approval process probably requires having that objective data from the investigation to back up your proposal, addressing potential supporters and detractors head-on with facts.
Absolutely. And a key strategy the source mentions is having advanced conversations with key stakeholders and advisors before you get into the formal review meeting.
Why is that important?
It allows you to educate them on the findings, get their input and perspective early, and surface any major concerns or objections privately first. This avoids surprises in the big meeting and usually leads to a much more informed, less confrontational decision-making process. Builds buy-in along the way.
And it's worth remembering, right, that the conceive phase is fundamentally about asking those tough questions and sometimes being willing to say no, even to potentially exciting ideas if they just don't hold up to scrutiny.
That's a sign of a healthy process, actually.
So there you have it. We've journeyed all the way through the conceive phase, that infamous fuzzy front end, from spotting potential opportunities and deeply understanding the market, the customers, and our own capabilities,
to honing in on a specific product concept, rigorously investigating its viability from multiple angles, and laying the foundational strategy and business case for moving forward.
What really stands out, I think, is the sheer amount of research, critical thinking, and, frankly, questioning involved. It requires balancing that intense inward look at what the company can do with a sharp outward focus on the ever-shifting market dynamics. Truly listening to customers and honestly assessing the competition.
Yeah, it's really the birthplace of the core product strategy, the value proposition, the differentiation. And maybe most importantly, it's where you get to test your riskiest assumptions and hypotheses early with relatively little investment compared to later phases.
Fully embracing the fact that many, maybe even most ideas shouldn't actually make it out of this phase, and that's okay.
Exactly. Understanding this process really helps you, the listener, see why some products ultimately succeed and others fail, highlighting all the vital foundational work that happens long before any serious development begins. It gives you a framework for evaluating innovation and opportunity in almost any context.
Which leads to a final thought. Maybe the true genius, the real success indicator of the conceive phase, isn't just about discovering those brilliant breakthrough ideas.
Where are you going with this?
Maybe it's equally, if not more, about cultivating the organizational discipline and the objectivity required to identify and sometimes courageously discard the less viable ones, saving precious time, money, and resources from being poured into a project that, deep down, was probably destined to struggle or fail anyway.
That's a powerful thought to end on. The discipline to say no early.
Thank you for joining us for this deep dive into the conceive phase.